Interesting.
I mean, you might want to, because, like, the Twitch clips people on YouTube need some content to upload.
Well, they've gotten a lot of content recently. I think they're pretty much good to go. There's nothing particularly exciting about that. Put it to XP and enchant your new weapon. Yeah, I get it. I'll see what at least it says, and if it's interesting, we'll keep going. If it's not, we won't.
Oh, am I loud?
Oh, yeah, let me turn it down. I turned everything up for the Rex story video.
I'm really sorry about that, guys. Twitch burn.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to discussing current events. I'm getting back into this now, and I think it's well worth starting with all the stuff that is happening with yesterday's hotfixes. Yet another round of hotfixes to our Azerite gear. What we've seen again is Blizzard rebalancing and rejigging the traits for all the Azerite gear across multiple classes in order to basically bring them in balance. So what that means is that if you get an Azerite piece, you shouldn't be super disappointed like people were in the initial weeks, because that trait is practically worthless in comparison to other traits which are boosting your DPS significantly, and also running into the issue of having 30 item level upgrades which simply are not upgrades, which is against the entire ethos of gearing up a character in the first place, trying to raise its strength and acquiring armor in order to do so. On top of the nerfing and buffing, considerable nerfing and buffing once again, some huge numbers, 70%, 40%, 50%, massive amounts of buffs and changes. They've decided to rejig some of the class balancing as well, buffing balanced druids with Star Surge and Starfall, arcane mages receiving buffs, because they are of course nerfing their higher traits. The traits that were giving them decent DPS increases have been nerfed, so they've had to buff the classes in order to compensate for the fact that those classes are now weaker. And also some buffs to Fury, just a flat 6% damage increase.
Apparently it worked.
Fury push into the limelight a little bit more than Arms for the warriors who are interested in that. Now, I know you guys are probably getting sick and tired of hearing this, but I think it needs reiterating at every single point, is we are moving closer and closer to what Blizzard really intends, which is to make the Azerite traits basically equal across the board. That's what they're aiming to do.
Well, that's obviously
so
what they're trying to do.
Be disappointed with the Azerite armor they acquire, because Azerite armor is, of course, for now, mysterious reasons, locked away and gated, so you can't farm it, you can't target it, you can't do anything. You have to hope for your Mythic Plus box, you have to hope to get something from a raid, you have to hope to get something from PvP in order to replace what for many people is now a significant downgrade on their gear. They can look across a character that's done a lot of Mythic Plus and have 370 plus item level and have these 340 Azerite armors just sat around doing nothing. So what this means is they're essentially killing their own system, and it seems to me like a significant portion of time is being taken by the devs to kill their own system. And by kill their own system, if they bring all the Azerite traits to be pretty similar to each other, then one has to ask the question is, what is the point in the system in the first place? Let's not forget that the Azerite traits they're buffing and changing don't, for the vast majority, have any significant role in gameplay whatsoever. We're simply trading one mindless proc that we can't do anything with for another mindless proc that we can't do anything with.
It's right.
It's also very irritating for people who felt they got lucky or did well or farmed, say, Mythic Zero in order to acquire the traits that were very powerful at the time, and then they wake up this morning and find that those traits have actually been nerfed and perhaps something else is now better. For example,
that's a lot of fun.
Balanced druids with their streaking stars, which had its damage reduced by 40% this morning. It was far and away the best trait for balanced druids, and early numbers are looking to other traits are now taking over. So many people will have farmed Mythic Zero in order to acquire 3 pieces of streaking stars traits. Not
it just sucks if you vendor that stuff and they change it.
Effect on gameplay, but mainly
that's the problem.
It's so powerful that they wanted to get it, and then there's some sort of satisfaction that comes with acquiring that set. I have 3 pieces of streaking stars. And then to wake up and just be like, well, it's not that good anymore. You might want something else, which is a huge, huge downgrade. This week we did make a video
that's what happened with Test of Might too.
A lot of people memed on the idea of it being dangerous. I truly see the Azerite armor as the biggest death nail in BFA, as more and more players are becoming dissatisfied, angry, and upset with how this system is playing out.
Oh wow.
It's very, very sad.
I don't know about
Death
Nail.
Sad, and I really, truly wish so
Seems
much
like a
time
lot.
wasn't being spent on trying to remedy this situation, which is unsalvageable at this point as far as I'm concerned. The only way this system can be even moderately rescued, in my mind, is when later down the line they add in yet another ring of traits, and then they put some effort and time into making them interesting. then maybe it'll be more of something we can care about. But that's not going to change the fact that the outer ring and the secondary ring are useless, and are potentially going to be useless for the remainder of the expansion based on the changes we've seen right now.
I think that's intentional. That's intentional, I'm pretty sure.
Just keep everything, because at the moment, every week, it's seemingly every reset, and maybe for the next couple of resets until they're finished doing their tweaking, is whatever traits you happen to have, gameplay changing or not, can simply just not be as good, and you might just have to go to your bank and say, right, I need that piece that I had 7 weeks ago, now that's the best, stick that on, and that's the way we'll go forward. What I will also point out here is this excessive amount of changes to the game week on week on week is also very dangerous for the player base. Unless you are heavily invested in World of Warcraft, it is nigh impossible to keep up with the sheer quantity of changes that are happening to classes.
That's true.
And happening to the armor you're acquiring, to the changes you're made. It is actually considered quite out of ordinary to go and seek a third-party website.
Yeah, these changes are happening really fucking fast.
Although you might see very, very busy streams, we're still not in the amount of players who are actually playing the game. Find out what is best, and then suddenly you'll find out maybe 6 months down the line that trait is no longer any good. That talent is no longer any good. That
very
class
exciting.
has been nerfed multiple times over, or buffed multiple times over, and people trying to keep up with all the changes and having to check graphs and lists on a now weekly basis at a minimum to try and keep their characters up to date is extremely dangerous. Blizzard needs to do something about this system. They are trying desperately, from what I can see, to make it work. They're trying to make it less of a hassle. It seems like a big waste of time to me. That's all I can see here, is a big waste of time that's causing nothing but frustration and disappointment amongst the player base. And that, for me personally, is really quite sad.
Yeah, Preach really doesn't like Azerite here. It's pretty clear.
A few days ago when the PTR launched for 8.1,
oh, is this the
people
Taunt?
noticed that the tooltips had changed for Taunt.
Here we go.
And that was removing the bonus threat portion of the tooltip. So
yeah.
If you don't understand how Taunt works, is when you taunt the mob, yes, you gain the threat and it looks at you, but you also gain a buff to do bonus threat to that target, so you can clear in a way be way ahead of the threat on that target.
It's for like off-tank switching.
This was intended for when Vengeance was in the game. Vengeance was in the game a long time ago. What this meant is tanks who were taking damage gained a buff called Vengeance, which allowed them to do obscene amounts of damage. It was not uncommon to see tanks at the top of the damage meter.
It was very good.
Also manipulating certain bosses, so when there are attacks that should kill you, they were actually using major cooldowns and stuff to survive those, to give themselves enormous Vengeance damage buffs so they could do crazy amounts of DPS. Blizzard took away the Vengeance mechanic. But while Vengeance was active, they made this bonus threat change. And this was because if you were off-tanking, you weren't getting hit, so you weren't doing this.
It's for tank swaps, basically.
And if you were to taunt the boss off the main tank who did have this huge Vengeance buff, that tank would do so much damage that you would simply lose aggro again immediately before your Vengeance could have built up so you could overtake the first tank. Makes sense, right? So you've got one guy who's doing ungodly amounts of damage. You're not doing anything. You taunt it, you do your best, but you're still doing your weak, mediocre damage, while the other tank continues.
Because he has all the
Continues
Vengeance.
to have this huge, huge damage modifier, which you simply can't out-threat. Now, a post was made yesterday regarding this change. They clarified once again, and there's two issues I take with this. One is that they did modify the tooltip, but the actual ability to buff your threat while using Taunt is staying. What they are doing, though, is removing the wording on the tooltip, so it does no longer tell you that that is how Taunt works. They are going to change the Taunt tooltip to no longer include the bonus threat portion. However, that is not disappearing. That mechanic is remaining.
Why did they get rid of it?
They are going to alter the bonus threat. They're going to reduce
it.
Now, I'm going to put the wording of this
What is the
down
point?
Because, unfortunately, it does start with confirming that they wanted to be 100% correct. However, this post is nothing but raising more questions, nothing but confusing.
Oh my God.
It's very, very bizarre, because they're going to give examples that don't make sense, and that's where it falls apart. Ultimately, what the change is that it's no longer needed to have enormous bonus threat when you use Taunt. It's a relic of a bygone era, and so they're going to modify that back down to normal times. That's okay. That's all it needs to be said, is that we still have this huge bonus threat portion It's from when Vengeance was in the game. Vengeance is no longer in the game, so we do not need to have this mechanic in the game anymore. Now,
what is the point?
Is there a problem
Really?
with it? Not that I'm aware of, and not that I've noticed for the expansion since Vengeance has been gone. I would, again, rather the time of the devs at the moment go into something else, but I don't know what's happening internally, and maybe some guy had some time to sort this out. It seems like something that didn't need to be modified in the first place, or could be done later down the line, given the problems BFA has right now.
Yeah.
They then went on to give an example that they were worried that potentially tanks would reach a point where the damage scaling of DPSs was going to become so absurd in BFA, which again raises warning flags. It's like, are you saying that our damage is going to scale insanely over BFA, and you've checked the numbers and the damage is going to get crazy? Because we just had the second squish. Rather not see damage numbers become absolutely intolerably large so quickly, but they are concerned that if tanks don't scale that way, then what you might end up doing is having tanks having used their taunt ability on cooldown just in order to use that bonus threat in order to maintain aggro against the DPSs. So if you're not clear on what that means, is they potentially concerned that damage dealers are going to be doing so much damage and tanks won't, that they'll have to use taunt, and that comes with this huge bonus threat in order to just keep a mob looking at them, because they're going to be so far away from what the damage dealers are doing. Now, the obvious question which was immediately asked by members of the community is, if that's what you're worried about, why would you reduce the bonus threat?
Why would you worry about
doesn't
that
make
at
any
all?
sense. If you're worried about the
How does
tanks
this make
not
the
being
game
able to
better?
keep up with DPSs, then why is this
I don't
fixed
get it.
by reducing the amount of bonus threat? That doesn't make any sense.
No, it
And
doesn't.
this led a lot of people to be very confused because the example was poorly worded. Personally, after thinking about it for quite some time, I think that the post should have literally said, we had this bonus threat for quite some time and it's no longer necessary, so we're just going to drop it back down, and that would be the end of the story, because I'm pretty sure that's what they were aiming to say. It's just worded rather poorly and the example wasn't done well. The blue that posted it did go on to say, if we ever got to the point, and it's not clear that it would ever actually happen, we're talking about the DPSs being able to over-aggro a tank very
That's
easily.
never happened.
We wouldn't want to use
like
taunt and
classic.
cooldown to be the way to deal with it anyway. We'd rather just make sure
Just
you're
make tanks
generating
do,
enough threats.
make sure tanks do more damage.
Which then raises the obvious question is, why would you use that as an example in the first place then? If your example as to why you're changing this is something you wouldn't allow to happen in the first place, why would you use that as the example? It raised a lot of questions, but ultimately, gameplay-wise, you shouldn't notice any difference.
Of course you...
At all. It's just that you do no longer have this bonus mechanic that was occurring for occurring in an expansion.
What?
Due to a mechanic that only existed in that expansion and no longer exists. So in gameplay-wise, there should be no difference whatsoever, and I don't suspect there will be. I don't think tank swaps will be a problem. I don't think you'll see any noticeable difference based on the wording, but I will get on the PTR whenever possible and test this out. So don't worry about that too much.
But then...
One thing that I did raise from this, and I think is worthy of discussion, is this idea, and we've had this backed up in the recent AMA, is once again removing information from the players intentionally.
Yes.
So this bonus threat mechanic will still exist.
For
However,
streamlining.
they're taking it
So
off
it doesn't
all the
confuse
tooltips
players.
so that it's not mentioned when you use taunt. And the phrasing
You don't want to
that was
confuse
used in
them.
the AMA is sufficient. What is sufficient? So this was in regards to tooltips explaining how the spells actually work. In the recent video we did on looting, I talked about reorigination array in Uldir. In game, it tells you very little, but the fact that it required multiple paragraphs of text to explain what was going on with that doesn't make sense and should be available in game. Why are we removing information from the players? And a bigger concern for me is this. Going forward, new tooltips will simply not have information that might be relevant. Because if they're going back and changing
you don't want to confuse them.
tooltips to remove
Can't confuse them.
even though those mechanics still exist, later tooltips are certainly not going to have the full information available to the player. And a very simple fix would be basic tooltips and advanced tooltips options for players.
That's
if
true.
Players are,
That's
if
very true.
Blizzard is worried about overburdening new or fresh or casual MMO players with far too much information in a tooltip, I totally agree with that. I think that's absolutely fine. I think some players don't need to know the ins and outs in every single spell when they first start playing the game. They just need to know Taunt pulls the mob towards them. That's fine, right? There's some buff in Uldir. Okay, that kind of makes sense for people who aren't reading much, don't want to know too much information. They're just quite happy to know that when I'm in Uldir, I gain a buff. When I taunt things, the mob looks at me. That's more than enough. And the other part of the effect
actually a
is
good
doing
idea.
itself naturally.
They should do that.
However, this is a decade-old game with many, 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 many players who like to understand how the game is working and do not like to wait for massive blue posts and
They want to
clarifications
understand how the game
on
works.
how this stuff works.
You know what you call
they
them?
would like to have it in there, and therefore it's an
Elitists.
advanced tooltip option that provides this extra information and doesn't feel like you're intentionally concealing information from the player. That
You don't want to
seems like the
confuse
way
them.
it's got to be. That seems like the way it's got to be. Because right now, we're not sure what's happening with stuff. And we're seeing effects. And
Yeah.
we're trying to work it out because these things are happening to our characters.
Very true.
We're seeing them happen all the time. And we don't know if it's correct or how it's supposed to be working or what it's supposed to do. Some people will claim that the mystery is part of the fun. I agree, but not
What
in
do my
terms of the
buttons
spells
do?
my character can use.
What do my
I want
spells
to know
do?
that the abilities my character can use, I want to know how they work. If you give me a mechanic
How
to
do I
deal
play
with
the
that I'm
game?
not sure how it works, that's fine. We'll figure it out. We'll talk through it. We'll try and strategize it. That's how the fun comes from. But my character has an ability to certain tools. I need to know how those tools work. It's no good me not knowing how any tool in the world works being provided with a toolbox, and especially some that include some very advanced tools,
true.
and me not knowing what they do and being asked to do something with them. That's unfair, and that's not the way it should go in my mind. Those are the big changes for today, guys. There'll be another one, no doubt, on Tuesday, which is again before the US reset, where we can find out more. But I'd love to see your thoughts.
It's confusing for
on
players to know what
the
their
Azerite
abilities
system,
do.
and mainly this tooltip change. The taunt changes I don't think is going to make much of a difference, but I would love to see your thoughts on this idea of concealing information from the players, be it by simplifying tooltips, and therefore us not being aware of how our spells work. Thank you very much for listening. I'll see you again. Bye-bye.
What do you guys think Blizzard thinks the average IQ of their player base is? If you had to guess. If I had to guess somewhere, I would say 85. Maybe a little bit lower than that, but somewhere around 85. Because obviously this is, I mean, this is incredible. I mean, the idea that it's too complicated for players to understand. Oh. That's fucking amazing, dude. We'll give this guy a +1. Here's the way that I see it, right? Is that a lot of this is, it's absolutely fucking ridiculous, right? 85 is almost average. Well, you know what I'm saying, though, right? Yeah, you're going to +11. Oh, I can't quite do that many. I can only click once. That doesn't know that you can press subscribe for, okay. 30 IQ to open a door, so less than that. Well, I don't know, man. Inconsistent across all tanks. Well, maybe the issue is that they should make it consistent and make it show everything. So, like, if what you're saying is that the tooltips are inconsistent across all of the different tanks, then maybe you should make them more consistent by adding the full information to all of the taunts rather than just some of them. So you're right in your premise that all of the tanks' taunt abilities should be the same if they're doing the same thing. But what I'm saying is that should be the action that results from that problem is adding more information and not taking it away. So that's basically what my issue is, and that's what I hope that they do. Oh.